you're really going to get into a lot of trouble if the company doubles or triples or quadruples in size. I've certainly come into working for startups where they've had, say, a finance leader before who focused on strategy and not on the baseline. And unfortunately, they were asked to leave the company because no one trusted the numbers. So, it is important to, as exciting as all the strategy and fundraising and FP&A and many different scenario modeling is, none of those things work unless you have a solid foundation, a solid baseline.
Before we start today's episode, I want to address a common challenge I have observed with FP&A professionals. While Excel skills are abundant, many are not fully tapping into Power BI's capabilities to enhance their financial analysis skills. With over a decade of experience in FP&A consulting and countless training sessions conducted, my most loved training by FP&A professionals, hands down, has been my Introduction to Power BI for Financial Analysts. So, for my loyal podcast listeners, I am giving you free access to it today. Check out the link in the description below to upgrade your FP&A skills today. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome to FP&A Unboxed, where we talk to finance leaders and movers and shakers in finance to unbox the challenges of FP&A today and how FP&A functions can actually up their game to the 21st century. So for that, we've got Alysha today. Alysha, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Before we go into the whole FP&A element, let's walk through your journey in your experience at companies like LoveFilm and Circle Funding and things like that, and how you have seen finance function evolve in startup environment, especially around automation and technology adoption, because we get a lot of feedback that, oh, we can't do technology, we are just a startup and we are not ready for it, we don't have the budget for it, things like that. So any thoughts on that one?
So just to intro myself, I suppose, is when I moved to London nearly 20 years ago, so it doesn't feel like it, but it has been. I started with LoveFilm and I did just kind of fall into it, really. As a migrant, you just kind of get what you can. And I didn't specifically focus on startups just because I hadn't had much experience before, but I was very fortunate that that company grew like crazy and then was acquired by Amazon, which was, another experience working for them for 2 years. So that was amazing. And I kind of got that startup introduction, so to speak. So then I moved to Funding Circle, again, early stage, and they had crazy growth again. So very lucky. And then worked on that IPO. We listed on the stock exchange after about 5 years. So I got that experience of 2 successful exits, which is very fortunate. Not everyone gets that experience at a startup. So I'm very happy for that. And then since then, I've created Fast Growth Consulting and Financial Leadership Foundations. So I just work with early stage now. So if I think about how it's changed, 20 years is a long time. I think the most obvious one for me is at LoveFilm, early stage, probably around Series B, I would say. We had an accounts payable clerk, a payroll clerk, an accounts receivable and bank reconciliation clerk, a assistant accountant, and then you had the financial controller. So a lot of roles in a finance function. And then we had budgeting and FP&A on top of that. Whereas today, when I start with a startup and we want to look at the roles, all of those more junior roles, the 5 that I listed specifically, is one finance manager. And that's because of the way that the software and the tools and the automation is set up today, is all of those, functions can be done by one person because everything is so heavily automated. So for me personally, I know that's not FP&A specifically, but that just kind of demonstrates how financial operations has moved in 10 years, I would say, not just the full 20. So that's been a big shift.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic, right? So from 5 roles combined into one because of of basically technology and automation. That is phenomenal. That just goes to show, right, that where are we going?
Yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of technology.
100%. Yeah.
So you described a startup environment as a fast-paced and chaotic and yet exhilarating, right? So what draws you to this space, and how do you shape this function when, as a finance leader, when you approach this? Is there something special you need to do?
I'd say there's probably two big reasons for me personally, and hopefully they kind of make sense for your listeners. But the big one is problem solving, I would say. So for me, I enjoy problem solving. That's my favorite skill, really. And in startups, there's always problems to solve. There's always firefighting to do. And sometimes these problems have to be solved really quickly, and you don't really have the time or the resources even to do much research before you implement a solution. So you really then have to go with prior experience, sometimes gut instinct. And I suppose that's the exciting part of a startup is you're having to take more risk, I suppose, particularly with solutions. Often my process there as a leader is to make quick decisions on things that don't matter or things that can be reversed. So if you know that, okay, if I implement this solution, but if it doesn't work, we can reverse it and put another solution, then it's worthwhile making those decisions quickly, but then makes the decision a bit more slowly for things that can't be reversed. That's kind of a way that I look at with the problem solving. The second thing I'd say, and this is probably more of a personal thing, is as your team's really small, then the contribution that the finance function does is quite obvious. You can make real change into the business. If you're talking about your history, you can say that you actually did help a business grow because you really do. You're part of that business success. Whereas you don't really get that in a large business. You're part of a cog. So I think that's exciting, but it's also more fulfilling, I would say, when you're working for a startup. Yeah,
Yes.
that's
So
how I
that
see
sounds
it.
quite exciting, right? I mean, because you can see the impact that you're making in the business,
That's
which is
right.
very
Absolutely.
tangible and satisfying when you go home in the evening after a crazy day.
Yeah, exactly.
So at Fast Growth Consulting, right, you referred that you now work, you set up your own consulting business as Fast Growth
Yeah.
Consulting, and you help startup prepare for fundraising and manage the cash runway and things like that. So what are the key
Yeah.
components of a finance function that high growth company should be looking at?
Yeah. So I suppose, do you mean so if you're working for a high growth business, what do you need to do to make sure it can deal with the growth?
No, I mean basically, what are the key components of a finance function, right? So when you are growing as a fast, if you are the
Yeah.
CEO of a fast company or a CFO of a fast company, and
Yeah.
it's really growing quickly, then what are the key components you need to make sure you have
Okay.
so that you are ready for fundraising and for your cash
Oh,
management
okay.
and things
Yeah.
like that, right?
Yeah.
Because I
Yes.
mean, there's so much going on as a
Yeah.
finance leader in a fast-growing company, as you've experienced many times.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
it's crazy. So, what are the key components you need to make sure these are need to be grounded before
Yeah.
we do anything crazy?
Anything else? Yeah, I mean, I'd love to say that there's lots of really exciting stuff, but unfortunately, it's finance 101. So, so I would say the step one, and I do kind of bang on about this a bit, but it is getting the baseline right. So it is things like having your balance sheet reconcile, if you don't, making sure that you meet all your compliance requirements. Basically, if you don't have a solid foundation, you're really going to get into a lot of trouble if the company doubles or triples or quadruples in size. I've certainly come into working for startups where they've had, say, a finance leader before who focused on strategy and not on the baseline. And unfortunately, they were asked to leave the company because no one trusted the numbers. So it is important to, as exciting as all the strategy and fundraising and FP&A and many different scenario modeling is, none of those things work unless you have a solid foundation, a solid baseline. And I would say apart from just the numbers, it's also getting the processes and the reporting right. So each process should be going through a review, the whole process, not just the software. we came into a company where they had upgraded their SaaS software. So, the recurring, rather than doing that manually, they had a software to do it, which is great. But the process before that software kicked in and the process after it was really cumbersome and took them days and days each week to deal with. So when we came in, you had to make that whole process slick, and then it took a day a month. And then it's like, okay, if the company doubles, that's fine. You're ready for that. So yeah, it's the boring stuff. It's making sure the numbers are right. You're hitting compliance. You've got a well-oiled machine. Your processes are slick. And I always say to people I work with, if your company quadrupled today, would your finance function and processes work? And if the answer is no, then you need to go and fix that first.
Honestly, I like the example which you just mentioned, right? About, yes, there is automation in the middle, but if there is rubbish in the beginning and rubbish at the end, then that automation respectfully is useless because it doesn't help. That is a piece which I think a lot of finance people need to recognize, that you could buy the fanciest software on the market. If you don't fix your processes,
100%.
it is not going to help you in the way.
No, you should always look at your process first before you even start interviewing software. And actually, sometimes a software can make the process, the problem worse. It just exacerbates the already bad process. So
Gets you the wrong answer faster. I mean, I keep telling a lot of my clients and prospects, like, if you put in the software too early in the game, it just helps you to get the wrong answer faster. It doesn't make it any better.
That is so, yeah, it's 100%. It's 100%. Yeah. And there's a common problem, I suppose, because, the software is more exciting. You see something, how it could be really great. But yeah, it's the same thing. You have to go back. It's like those Six Sigma, kind of process of doing the review and having a look at the process first before implementing a change or a solution.
Yeah, it's a shiny new object attraction, right? They just want the shiny new toy now. I don't want to
100%.
You have hundreds of toys in the house. Fix that first. No. I want the shiny new toy right now.
100%. And every founder loves a shiny new toy as well. Sometimes I find it's the founder you have to hold back rather than the finance person. So it's best to not tell the founder about this shiny new object until you've reviewed the process. Otherwise, they would have bought it for you before you're even ready.
Absolutely, completely agree, right? So exactly in the same vein, how do you balance? You talked about getting the foundations correct. So how do you balance getting the robust financial controls in place with the agility required for an early stage company when you're growing? Exactly, again, you said, right? You double yourself, you triple yourself, you quadruple yourself so regularly, and you are still trying to make sure that there is financial controls in place for all that agility to keep growing, so that the controls are not holding you back, but are in place as you grow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, when we start with the client, we do a due diligence and process review and fixing all those things before we even look at anything else, because in order to deal with all of the things that a startup requires you to do, you can't really do them if you don't have that foundation. So you definitely need to do that first. And, sometimes you may have to do it concurrently with other things, especially if you're working in-house. But I mean, if something needs to be done quickly, so for example, the businesses decide to change a product or go into a new channel and you've only had about 1 week to digest this information, usually then you may have to do a quick plaster or a quick new process that's very manual but can implement it quickly. But then the challenge then is you need the discipline to go back and refine the process if this new process is to remain there. And generally I find when processes are bad or manual or cumbersome is because something was done quickly because the business needed it to, but then no one went back to the process to refine it. So it's always worth reviewing every single process regularly, but also sometimes it's questioning whether these additional requirements are even necessary. So you may have had to have done some reporting or some part of process quickly because the business needed it, and then they've got product market fit or they've got rid of the product or they've changed or whatever, then it's probably not necessarily anymore. So it's just constantly reviewing and refining. And but yeah, you definitely have to do quick things and manual things and back of the envelope models and all these sort of things.
Yes,
But
exactly.
it's just having that discipline.
Exactly. Absolutely. Cannot agree more, man. I mean, you have, as finance function, you want to be agile and want to adapt quickly to the business's requirement. But I
Mm.
think 99% people fail to go back and review what the heck.
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
automate this? Can I make it more efficient? Can I even combine it with my existing, for example, reporting suite or my existing, processes or control checks? Can I combine it in there and not have a separate one just for this particular line of business or things like that? But people fail to go back and review. I think that is a big
Mm.
challenge, I
Yeah.
think, for
So,
most finance functions.
yeah.
So tell us about your book, man. I mean, your book talks about transitioning from management to leadership. Can
Yeah.
you share a pivotal moment in your career where that highlighted this shift for you?
The first time that I was the number one in finance person role, I didn't fully understand what leadership meant. I didn't have a full understanding of it. I probably wasn't doing any self-study, which was a mistake I had to rectify quickly. And basically, I thought if I worked harder than anyone else in the business and just was producing more than anyone else in the business and basically was firefighting the whole time, I was a good leader. So I was the one person saying hi to the cleaners at nighttime, and and I just thought that killing myself meant that I was a good leader, and quite, I mean, we know now hindsight gives you 20/20 vision, but I actually, I actually, of course, was not. And probably about 6 months into this role, I got my first ever negative feedback in my 360. And normally, because I've always been quite diligent and I take ownership and work hard, my feedback's been always positive. So that, and because I was working so hard, I thought, I was doing a good job and I was a good leader, and that was an absolute wake up call for me. And it was It was terrible. I could have quit and just walked away, or I could have said, picked myself off the floor and said, what does this mean? And thankfully I had an amazing mentor who actually wrote the foreword of this book. I had a few sessions with him. I hadn't spoken to him for a couple of years, and I called him up and said, help. and I and anyway, I had a few sessions with him, and he gave me a few other book recommendations as well, one of which I recommend quite regularly, which is The First 90 Days. Yeah. That's also very, very good. And I basically had to upskill very, very quickly and find out what does leadership actually mean, and what should I be doing, basically. Because I think that's a real challenge, is when you're going from manager to a leader. If you think about the management accounts for a finance person, as a financial controller, you're doing the whole management accounts, you're writing the commentary, you send it to your CFO, and then it comes back with a few challenges, and then you send it out. So as a CFO, what are you supposed to do with the management accounts? What's your role in this, apart from reviewing it, which is, senior financial controller? What else should you be doing? And I think having that understanding of what a leader actually does, and as a financial controller or FP&A manager, what your job is. You have a task list. It's usually a monthly or a quarterly cycle. You do the things that you need to do. You meet with the people you need to meet. But when you go above that, what's your role then? And so that was a real steep learning curve for me. And because speaking to a lot of experienced CFOs now, funnily enough, my experience is not unique. It's actually, most people had exactly the same, more often than not. And everyone kind of jokes, oh yes, I remember the first FD role. I barely kept my head above water. I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah, it's not uncommon. And so that's why I basically wrote the book that I wish I had 15 years ago, basically.
No, that sounds fantastic. I think people should get a copy. I mean,
Yeah,
because essentially, right, the reality is that our chartered basically teaches you how your IFRS works, or how your accounting standards, management packs, reports work. They don't teach you how to be a leader, and that's the challenge, right? It's a very different ball game. There's a very famous quote, right, which says, "What got you here won't keep you here."
That's 100%. I've read that as well. It's brilliant. It's very good. Yeah, yeah. And it's so true.
So
Yep.
you've developed basically a financial leadership fundamentals course as well, right, to train
Yeah.
CFOs. So what are
Yeah.
the common challenges that are emerging leaders face, and how does your program actually address those?
So I'd say there's probably three main ones. Obviously, there's more than that, but the three main ones I see is the kind of imposter syndrome or lack of confidence. So I find, you don't get confidence with the title. That's a mistake I made as well. You get a leadership title because people believe in you, but that doesn't mean you automatically switch to confident. It's actually a skill, and I do encourage people to work on it before you get the title. It's actually easier there. So it's usually, so we talk about what does that mean? Why do you have this kind of imposter syndrome or lack of confidence? And then there are things that you can do to address it and work on it. Again, ideally before your role. So we do go through that. And I do feel sometimes as part of it is understanding what the leadership role is. So usually the lack of confidence, because people don't know, they're a bit, overwhelmed with where they kind of fit, because going from a manager to a leader is a huge jump. And actually, personally, I feel that jump is bigger than going from unqualified to qualified. I think that's easier because you have a roadmap, a mentor, whereas a manager to a lead, not so much. So the second one is kind of feeds into that, is what does a leader actually do? So that feeling of overwhelm, not sure if they should be doing the right things, that mindset of moving from a manager to a leader. So like in the book, we kind of touch on it as well. Every single chapter has a task list, but also in our module as well, we have workbooks and things for everyone to go through. So they have a framework to implement in their role. So even though you could probably smash out all of the training courses within 2 to 3 months, actually it takes time to go through that. And we have monthly Q&A sessions as well to talk things out. Generally, people will come to the call and say, okay, my particular situation, I have this problem, and I'm not sure how to deal with it. And we talk about how potentially they could implement change within their business. And then the third and final is fundraising. It's usually just because people have never led a fundraise before, or they don't know what to do with fundraising. So we go through the whole fundraising process because it's quite unique to startups and scale up. So especially if people come from banking, they might have a good understanding, or if they're coming from audit, it's quite common for an auditor to come in as a finance leader in a startup. They've never done fundraising before. So we go through kind of that fundraising process and how you kind of prepare for that. So our kind of focus, or our goal, is that everyone that does the course is a skilled and confident leader within 12 months. That's kind of our focus for everyone that comes through.
Yeah, but that sounds so interesting, right? So, because one of the things you mentioned, right, because most of us are chartered or well qualified, we can all easily go through the course, but the implementation piece is the critical one, right? That's the time consuming piece. That's the piece where you really spend time to see, okay, this is a framework, this is my situation. Now, how do I take that framework on this situation and bring it in? I mean, that is really, really time consuming, right? It's
It
quite
is,
interesting.
yeah. And it takes longer than you think. So, just something as simple as upgrading your management accounts, that can take 3 months. Like, it's not taking it from something that looks like a financial controller put it together to what a CFO put together. It's quite a big difference. And, and it just can take longer than you think, always. Always.
Yeah, always things always take longer than you think, and they're
Yeah.
actually simpler than you believe, right? If you
100%.
really break it out, they're simpler than you believe. But anyway,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I think that's the thing that kind of surprised me as well, going from manager to a leader, is the different mindset, the way that you look at things differently, it's not rocket science. It's not. So it's just thinking and looking at things differently. And that's it. And once the penny drops, people are like, this isn't so hard. I can do this. And I think that's where the confidence kicks in and the imposter syndrome goes, is because you actually realize you already have all the skills. You've just got to implement them differently.
Yeah, exactly. And that is the thing, right? Exactly the words you use. When the penny drops, and you can see it 90% of the time when you talk to people, you can see it on their face as soon as the penny drops. Like, yes, now he's got it. What the hell are you talking about?
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Anyway, you mentioned basically setting specific boundaries to maintain work-life balance. How has this impacted your effectiveness as a leader and now as an entrepreneur?
When you're running your own business, you could easily work on it about 24 hours a day. Like no problem. So, but it comes back to discipline again as well. So, all of the things I've kind of talked about before about having boundaries. Boundaries is a big Gen Z term, and so it's talked about a lot in social media. But it is true. But I always notice that when I go on holidays and I make the conscientious decision not to log in, after about 5 days of relaxing and doing nothing, by day 6 or day 7, I'm coming up with the best ideas and all these things. And I'm like, I always have to remember to bring a journal because I have to write all this stuff down. And actually, it's amazing how the brain works like that you're actually so much better as a leader if you take a break, because your brain just has a rest and then it just comes out firing. And you just think of things out of nowhere and you're like, wow, that's such a good solution. Why didn't I come up with that 3 months ago when I really needed it? But you're just like, it's amazing how your brain works. And that's why I think really taking a proper break and not bringing your laptop on holidays will actually be beneficial to the business and to your career, really.
No, I completely agree. I've had my best ideas when I'm out away from the laptop than basically at the laptop. You
I
get
think that's also, sorry to butt in.
But
I think that's also why in January and September is the peak months for resignations. Because everyone has a break in December and August and decides that this job's not for them. And then so January and September are the peak months.
Yeah, no, but that is it, right? So if you think it through clearly, take a step back away, you realize this job is not for me. I don't need this level of stress or whatever else that looks like, or I want a better opportunity in life, right? Or something more challenging in life. So, hey, sounds about right. So, what strategies do you apply to stay ahead in an ever-evolving finance industry, right? Because you have to encourage continuously learning, not only to yourself, to your team. And I think that is one which people find most challenging because, okay, you as a leader can pick up a few books, a few courses, go to your mentor and things like that. But how do you get your team to do that and get them to understand that they need to do this? Otherwise, actually, they are going to, start falling behind.
Yeah. For me personally, I do the things that I suppose particularly people listening to this do, which is, signing up for workshops, going to networking events, signing up to emails, industry-specific newsletters, podcasts, of course. So I certainly do all of those. I've got one benefit for me because I already have a course. I actually give the course to my team, so I make them do my course. So I'm quite in a unique situation there. The only thing you can lean on is CPD, just because everyone has to do their CPD. So usually if you can give them the free things or company paid for things that will qualify for CPD, then usually that's the motivator. I generally find people are more motivated that way. The other way is when you understand what somebody's career goals are. I do talk about that being quite important for your team. You should know where they want to go. Then you can lean into that. So if you know, say they want to be a head of FP&A or they want to be a finance director in a few years, then you can have that conversation with them of where are their skill gaps. once you've identified those together, then you can encourage them to fill those gaps with certain courses or books or podcasts or whatever it is relevant. So they're the kind of the two ways that I would do it.
Yeah, but also it also depends on their learning, because one of the things I always find is how do people learn? Different people I've found learn differently. Some people learn by reading. Some people learn better by attending a podcast like this, because they're better at they can focus better by listening rather than reading a book and things like that. So I think as a leader, it is important to understand what works for your team, individual members as well.
Yeah, no, that's a
That
very good point. Agreed. Yeah.
That's critical. So, okay, now since you've set up your own foundation for female founders as well. So,
Yeah.
as someone who champions female founders and financial leaders, and reflecting on your journey, what advice would you give women listening to this podcast? Right, and they are aspiring to be leaders in finance positions and startups. So, what is the advice you'd give specifically for women, and how is that different for men, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm going to have to generalize, unfortunately. But that's the experience that I've had, is that men generally, not always, but generally know their worth better than women do. When I've worked for companies, a perfect example is working for companies. You have a budget salary for a role, and 90% of the men would negotiate a salary up above budget, and I'd know that because I'd owned it. And 0% of women, or maybe 5% of women, would negotiate what they're worth when they're starting with a new company. And that observation was interesting to me, that a man would always try and get more because they believed they were worth it, whereas a woman would always accept the salary that they would be offered, and not try and negotiate more. You know, I have been caught at school gates coaching my my mothers at the gate, telling them to ask for more during their review times, and ask for more holidays and more flexibility and they'd be like, "Oh, I can't do that." And I said, "Yes, you can." So one of my big catchphrase is, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And sometimes I have to say that to myself, if I even still, and I think men as well, is when you think you could, if you don't ask for something, it's 100% going to be no. So it doesn't, the worst it can be is someone will say no. So if you ask, you might get. So I think it's having that confidence of, I've sometimes today, as I said, I've typed out an email when I'm negotiating with a client or something, price rise or something, which I still am putting off. And I type out an email and I close my eyes. If I don't ask, the answer is no, and then just hit enter. You just sometimes have to just do something that doesn't feel natural. But it's something that I see, unfortunately, that women aren't as good at doing as what men are. Not suggesting that no women do, not suggesting all men do, but in my experience, that's probably the biggest gap that I've seen.
Yeah, no, I can completely, frankly, maybe I'm one of those exceptional men then in that scenario. I can completely resonate with that. I am working with a business coach. He keeps telling me, he's like, why are you underselling 25 years of your experience?
Exactly.
You are absolutely underselling it. You should ask for as much money that makes you feel sick.
Yeah.
That's his
Yes.
words for me. Like, it should make you feel
Yeah.
sick.
No, 100%. Yeah, no,
Yeah,
that's
but
a
it's
big
hard.
thing.
I can resonate with that. I mean,
It
it's
is
very
hard.
difficult.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously additional challenges that women have. I think one big thing that I'd like to see change, actually, which sounds odd, is that the status of a man asking for time off for their kids and having flexibility, or working part-time, that kind of stigma is removed. Because I saw this really interesting HR expert. Unfortunately, I can't remember, it was a long time ago, but it really stuck with me. She said the people that are more likely to get promoted in a pay rise is a full-time man, then a full-time woman, then a part-time woman, and the least of all is a part-time man. And I thought that was really interesting, that the women is getting detrimental at the top end, but the men are getting the detrimental at the bottom end as far as salary is concerned. And it's like, unless that changes, then you're not going to get that equality. So it's allowing men to want to be fathers and have flexibility and work part-time if they want to and not have it detrimental, so that there's more equality across the workforce. So I thought that was a really interesting statistic, considering the challenges we currently have with equal pay.
Yeah, but I don't know. Maybe it's just, I'm going to be controversial here. Frankly speaking, I don't think gender should play a part in this conversation altogether. As long as somebody is bringing value to the business, they have a right to the same pay. It's not too complicated. And if a man doesn't come and come join a job and perform as well as he needs to and adds value to the business as he needs to, he just needs to go back as well, as much as a woman would, and things like that. I mean, almost like gender should be irrelevant of conversation in this one. And it should be much more data and performance based and action based, value addition based, leadership style based, things like that. And those should be your criteria for, giving more salary or less salary and things like that.
I mean,
Because
that's
another
then,
thing I don't like is, people overcompensate. Now they will go out of
yeah,
their way and hire a woman in a role because no, we need to balance our gender ratio and things like that.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's now reverse as well, right? So you need
Yeah,
to.
yeah. No, I agree with you there as well. I suppose that's also moving towards value-based salary rather than hours worked salary, which I'm very pro, because I had that experience. I reduced to a 4-day week, but my role didn't change, just my salary. And that incensed me, because I was still doing the role in 4 days. I was just more efficient. But I got a 20% pay cut.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and again, I have my frustration with that as well. I still come across finance leaders who are like, no, but I need you in office 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or whatever
Yeah.
else. And if you're not there for 2 extra hours, they feel like you didn't do enough. I don't care. If somebody takes 4 hours to do something and if I can do it in half an hour, I
Yeah.
am more efficient. I should actually get paid more because I
Yeah.
can than that person.
Yeah.
Not,
Yeah.
not look
Yeah.
detrimentally just because I got it done more efficiently. What are you
Yeah.
encouraging me to do? Sit in the
Exactly.
office and
Doing
twiddle my thumb?
Yeah.
I mean, is that
Yeah.
what you want me to do? I mean, that's
Yes.
not very,
Yes.
very
Yeah, I mean,
futuristic,
I
is
thought
it?
remote working, would work towards our favor, but it's starting to go the other way around, where people are now being asked to come back in again. So I think we're still a long way away from that. So I don't know if AI may change it. I don't know, but we
Yeah,
shall
no, I
see.
don't know. I think respectfully, I don't think no amount of tech stack can change that. It is a mind
Yeah,
shift
potentially.
more than the
Mm,
tech shift. There is enough technology out there already for people to be more
yeah,
efficient and
that's true.
effective without AI as well. And AI is only going to
Yeah.
make it even more. But sorry, but people's brain needs to move as well. If I may,
No,
if I may be
yeah,
so
I agree.
bold.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh, anyway, so if I come to my last three, standard questions for everybody, everybody has to answer these. So, where do you think is the future of FP&A in 3 to 5 years? You are not allowed to say AI because we all know AI is coming. AI is
No, we already
beautiful.
know. Yeah, yeah. I think my answer would be because of AI, because it's kind of
Yeah,
implied that that's
and
absolutely
that
going
is
to
a
happen.
fair
So
answer.
yes, I think FP&A, but actually finance leaders across the board, actually, I think the future of FP&A is leaning into those more leadership skills. So it'll be focused on, how many more insights can you give to the business? I think communication skills is critical, and already FP&A does have to communicate a lot, but I think it'll become even more of the role, that relationship building, that business partnership skills, because they're the things that AI can't do. So it's leaning into those skills. So what is AI telling us? How can we use that information in this situation? How can we use that information to drive the business forward and predict the future? So it's more the interpretation of, rather than the creation of. So I think that's where FP&A is leaning into.
one thing that most FP&A functions need help with today, which would help them become better strategic finance business partners, you reckon?
Maybe I'm not informed, but really, really inexpensive and good budget and modeling tools. I think there's really good modeling tools out there today, but they're not cheap.
Oh, there are some very cost efficient ones. I mean, if you
Oh,
don't know
good.
them,
Well, maybe we need
talk
to
to
have a
me offline,
conversation.
man. Talk to me offline. There are very cost efficient tools out there.
Oh, is there? Okay.
Yeah.
So I need to this is why when I looked at this question, I was like, I think I have a feeling that my knowledge in this area is going to be thrown down, because at the moment I can tell you right now, when I've been on panels at networks, most people in the startup space, like early stage, so we're talking seed, series A, are still using Excel and Google Sheets for all of their budget modeling. So let's have a conversation about what they should be using, because
Yeah,
it's
no.
not widely known. So
Yeah,
yeah.
so really small businesses as well. You can your today there are solutions out there which can fit almost, I'd say, any budget. I mean, it can't be a budget of 2K or 3K because that is not going to work. But any half decent sized budget, it is not hundreds of K anymore. That day age and time is gone. Where it's like, okay, any solution is 100K or 200K or 500K. That day age and time is gone, for sure. So
Yeah.
again, good point. Anybody listening to this, think about it, and
Yeah,
should have
I
a
know of
conversation.
one, say 1 to 2K, but it's still, I mean, we've tested out some tools that do say consolidation and things like this, and they have a budgeting tool within it, but they're not great. So, we do test things, but yes, if there's anything that's like a few hundred, probably not. It's probably still another year away, but yeah. Anyway, I think that's like, I still think that is an area that is going to explode over. I still think there's a lot of room. I think it's going to explode. But anyway, we shall see.
We'll figure it out, right? We'll keep our eyes peeled. For someone who is looking to move into FP&A and or has just started in FP&A, what is the skills or certification you think they should be looking to acquire?
Yeah, a lot of FP&A people I'm working with now, they're quite good at tech, coding, those kind of things. 20 years ago when I was modeling, we didn't have any of those skills. We just had to do V lookups in Excel. That's all you needed. So definitely, much more tech focused than what it ever was. But I would say communication skills. I would written,
Perfect.
verbal, relationship building. It's those softer skills, I think, that are really important to be able to have a good conversation with the leadership team individually as a whole. I think communication skills are going to become more and more important, I think.
Yeah. Okay. I have to say, Alicia, this is like the 12th podcast I have recorded, and out of the 12 podcasts, at least 4 or 5 of them have all on this question said communication. So
Oh, is
there
it?
you
Oh,
go,
that's
right?
interesting.
Communication. Yeah, literally, you can. We'll come back to it, and that critically, obviously, clearly tells me what leaders in finance and FP&A think about, the key skill in FP&A. So there we go.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean,
Any
who would have
closing?
thought 10 years ago that that would have been the response? So I wouldn't have said communication 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, I think most people wouldn't have because people used to much more think about, your technical skills in terms of your accounting standards or things like that. Or, if you knew Excel and VBA. I mean, I know VBA was a thing at a point in time, and I know it's still for a lot of people. But that used to be a focus at a point in time, whereas now communication has become central, apparently, which is quite interesting. Any closing thoughts? I mean, I think this was a very good discussion, man. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, we covered quite a bit.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, probably not any more thoughts, but yeah, I think that whole management leadership piece is probably the biggest takeaway here. Moving from that one role to the other. We do have loads of free resources, so feel free to look me up on LinkedIn. But yeah, I think that's a real interesting piece. And again, same with FP&A. I think across the finance function, that the leadership skills, if you really hone into that, AI is not going to take your job. It's people using AI and then have acquired and are using those leadership skills are the people that are going to take your job. So
Perfect.
yeah.
No, that sounds wonderful. Thank you so much, Alysha, for your time and sharing some wonderful stories, man. That sounds very, very interesting. Thanks a lot. I hope people enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I definitely had a lot of fun on this one. So thanks a lot, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.